welcome to my channel, Taylor Talks Tales. Today I have a book discussion for you guys. A little different than my book reviews because I'm going to go far more in depth into this book and sort of some topics surrounding the book because it kind of explains my rating for this book and my thoughts and feelings on it because I'm very passionate about some of the subject matters in this book. So there are going to be some spoilers, and also it's going to be a heavier video. Trigger warning, I'm going to be talking extensively about substance abuse disorder. So it's not going to be a fun video. I have plenty of other fun videos if you'd love to go check those out. And if you aren't up for it, totally fine, I understand. I'd love it if you could join me on this journey, but ultimately, you know, if it's going to be too triggering or it's just you're in the mood for something more lighthearted, this is not that video. Alright, so originally I wasn't going to review this book, but then I changed my mind. I was at the library returning a couple books and I saw this on the shelf and was like, oh yeah, that's right, I should probably review this, because I had a lot of strong thoughts and feelings about it. It touches on a subject matter that I will say I'm very knowledgeable about it. I have extensive experience with it, so trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I'm an open book, so please ask me questions. If you have any concerns or you want me to elaborate on something, let me know, because I'm more than happy to do that for you after the video. I can always make a separate video going into more details about anything, so just let me know. But anyway, we're going to be talking about The Art of Losing by Lizzy Mason. I'm going to read the inside flap and then we're going to get started. And then we're going to just talk about a bunch of things related to the book. On one terrible night, 17-year-old Harley Langston's life changes forever. At a party, she discovers her boyfriend, Mike, hooking up with her younger sister, Audrey. Furious, she abandons them both. When Mike drunkenly attempts to drive Audrey home, he crashes and Audrey ends up in a coma. Now Harley is left with guilt, grief, pain, and the undeniable truth that her now ex-boyfriend has a drinking problem. So it's a surprise that she finds herself reconnecting with Raph, a neighbor and childhood friend who's recently out of rehab and still wrestling with his own demons. At first, Harley doesn't want to get too close to him, but as her sister slowly recovers, Harley begins to see a path forward with Raph's help that she never would have believed possible, one guided by honesty, forgiveness, and redemption. So, this book, it's a solid contemporary YA debut. There's nothing objectively wrong with it, but I can only give it 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm going to explain why. So this book, Lizzy Mason, in the very beginning, acknowledges, like basically in an author's note, acknowledges that she herself was an addict when she was in high school and went through rehab and sort of this whole process, and then she herself has been clean and all that. So she brings some experience to this, which shows in the book, and that definitely is a strength to the book. But ultimately, I think where this book failed, for me anyway, was it attempted to do too much in one book, especially considering this is only 320 pages, and it's a young adult book, so the font's bigger and the pages, like just the way the book is set up, it doesn't leave a lot of room for exploring the topics that deserve to be explored more. I especially thought that the relationship between Audrey and Harley, the whole like, oh, she cheated, this whole thing, I felt like that detracted from the message of the book. I mean, I know ultimately it was about forgiveness and sisterly love, that portion, but I felt like too much time was really spent on it. Like Harley was just super angry and had these emotions, and there was just, that could have been more concise, and that could have opened up more time for what I really wanted the book to address, which was relationships and people just suffering from addiction and how addiction impacts not just the addict, but other people. Because ultimately, when I went into this book, I was hoping it would make me cry. I was hoping it would be the book, when I finished it, that I would buy like 10 copies and start just passing it out to people and saying, please read this book. You will understand so much. It'll explain, all these things do it, please. And unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily the case. So some of the things that she did right, I definitely did appreciate how she gave a human side to addiction, of course. It wasn't just, even Mike, he's a little bit of a jerk, but he wasn't like this soulless jerk who's terrible, because it's so easy, I think, to paint the picture of someone who drinks and drives as, oh, they must be an awful, god-awful person and terrible and all this. Mike is definitely contrasted against Raph, though, because the heart of it, there are these two addicts. One does not see the error in his ways, one is in the heart of addiction and does not want to recover, does not think he has a problem, and that's Mike. Because he goes to rehab at some point and then comes out, and then 2 days later there's a keg party and just hasn't learned anything. It hasn't worked the steps or gone on medication or done anything he's supposed to do. As opposed to Raph, he is trying. He also went to rehab. His parents found him almost dead. He had drank so much and then took pills, and it just overloaded his system, so he almost died. That was an awakening experience for him, so he went to rehab. He came back out and is trying his best to navigate recovery. And I really wanted to, follow him on that journey. And so I liked the, two examples where it's not just like all addicts never want to recover or something like that, or like generalizing people. Especially because it's so easy to pinhole people and use cliches about addiction, because there's so much misunderstanding out there and misinformation and stereotypes and stigmas and all of that. So it's just really difficult to get authentic views and ideas of addiction. And I think it was really powerful that it's taking place from Harley's point of view. I still would really love to find a really strong recovery book from the detail of the addict. But I also think it's the strength of this book is showing that there's somebody who does not have addiction. She didn't grow up in a house with addiction. It's her ex-boyfriend and then her potential future relationship and romantic interest. Because it shows that addiction touches not just the addict. So, in the United States alone, there's an estimated between, it varies based off of which website you go to and which statistics, but let's just estimate there's about 24 to 25 million addicts. This is ranging from all kinds of substance abuse to other types of addictions, but it's 25 million. Of that 25 million, only 10% seek out treatment. And of that 10%, the rates of long-term recovery are just so abysmal, really. It's so tragic and so sad, and it just breaks my heart to see this. But the thing is, too, of those 20, between 20 million to 25 million, it's a large number. Those addicts impact an average of 5 other people directly. And that's just the average. And that's just directly. You're going to be indirectly impacted by addiction no matter what. It could be, a boss or your next door neighbor or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. A lot of times it is. And that's why it's known as a family disease. Not only because it tends to run in families, but it also, once you have an addict in the family, it impacts everybody. And that's the thing. And that's what makes it so complicated, because it feels like to the addict that it's just their disease, their burden to carry, and they're all wrapped up in that, because addiction is this all-consuming darkness, and it's hard to see and think about anyone else when you're in it. It's all about the addict as opposed to the family members. They love and care for this person, but they're overwhelmed. They have no idea what to do. It becomes damaging to them, because if you don't take the proper precautions to take care of yourself during this situation, you can all of a sudden feel helpless and hopeless and start to resent the addict and think you're never going to get better. Or if you loved me, you would stop drinking. Or if you loved me, you would pull yourself up and do this. and it's this unhealthy dynamic. And so that's why there need to be more books about that. And I think there need to be more books for non-addicts to read to get and understand what the addict is going through. Because the addict feels like nobody understands them. They don't get what it feels like to need something so badly. Where it's like you've been out in the desert for 3 days, haven't drank a glass of water. All of a sudden the water's put in front of you, and then you just... because that's how your brain gets rewired. It gets rewired to need this thing, to think it is more important than anything else to you, which is why you have addicts on the street who will skip meals in order to save up money to go get something. It's so dark and sad, and there's so much misunderstanding behind it, but ultimately it impacts lots of people. And so that's why I think this book does a good job. And especially too, I've read a couple books where the main character has a parent who is an alcoholic, and usually the parent's very stereotypical. It's like an abusive dad who sits on the couch all day and just drinks a bunch of beer and then just is flaky and has all these issues, even though the average addict can look like anybody. And in fact, there are a lot of women addicts who are coming out, and women in particular tend to keep their addictions very quiet. And when you consider anywhere between 1 in 10 to 1 in 7 people have a substance abuse issue, chances are you've probably met someone. You probably know someone. Even if it's not a family member, you go to a party, maybe there's 20 people there, chances are there's somebody there who is struggling. You may not know it, especially because of stigma. You keep it inside and you don't say anything. But chances are you probably know somebody. And it's just so hard. It's hard because it's hard for the addict, it's hard for the supporters in navigating that. And I definitely think with fiction, because fiction is kind of supposed to mirror reality. Like there have been so many times where, like in my life, where I found the right book with a character who made me feel seen. Like I remember actually reading Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, and that was the first time I actually met a character who identified as having social anxiety. And as someone who struggled with social anxiety, I was like, I feel seen and connected. That's why I enjoyed the book. And there's other situations like that, and sometimes you can see how a character handled something in a book and be able to mimic it in your own life. And that's why these books dealing with addiction are important. And recovery too, because that's the thing, is that people can recover. So many addiction books out there, they detail the fall, the descent into hell, the crushing awfulness of hitting rock bottom. Or it has the message of don't do drugs, they're scary, or all this, or there's the stereotypes of just, drunks are terrible, addicts are terrible, they're going to do awful, terrible things, and at heart there's something wrong with them, there's a moral failing, they don't have willpower, they're awful. And it's just very hurtful, all of this rhetoric, because ultimately we're just dealing with sick people. Would you shame somebody who had diabetes or cancer or asthma or just anything, or shame somebody who has depression? People do that. They shouldn't. But would you shame people for that? And I think ultimately it's because people think that addicts can make a choice. But the thing is that addiction ultimately is a disease of choice, where you are no longer, your brain has been so wired that you are no longer able to make the proper choices unless you go through treatment, get help, get medication, get connected with people, do all these things. And even then, there's still work to be done. We're still failing as a society to care for people with addiction. We are not doing a good job. I'm sorry, but we are not. If the failure of any kind of treatment was anything remotely like it is for addiction treatment, I wouldn't go to that doctor. I wouldn't go to that hospital. I'd be like, success rate of 10%? No way. I'm not doing that. I'm not taking chances on that. It's so sad. But anyway, going back to the book, I think that's ultimately why I wanted this to be a platform. I wanted this to be the book that breaks out and is showing how a normal, non-addict person can both support an addict and a person in recovery and also take care of themselves. Because I think that's one of the things that this book, there are a couple things this book does right, is that Harley ultimately, she feels a little overwhelmed at times by Raph's issues, especially since she's very uncomfortable with the idea because she dated Mike, who had an alcohol problem. And she was like, whoa, this makes me really uncomfortable. Are all addicts going to be like this? Are they all the same? Answer is no. And so she does a good job of taking care of herself by going to therapy and just talking to people, because ultimately, in order to support someone with addiction and support someone in recovery, and those are kind of separate things. Like when someone is trying to go through recovery and trying to stop, you handle things a little bit different than you would if they're like full-blown addiction, don't see a problem or the error in their ways. It's different. Once somebody is actually in recovery, you have to handle them a little bit different. But when someone's in recovery, you also have to take care of yourself. It's just like when you're on an airplane, you have to put your mask on first so you can put it on somebody else. Because the person's going to know if you are not up to being there for them. They pick up on that. They'll sense that there's sort of resentments you may build up when you're like constantly like upset if they drink and they say things incoherent things or like hurtful things or anything like that, and then you start building up that resentment because it hurts. Because the thing is, the drunk person or the high person or anything like that, they're kind of numb in that situation. Once they come off of it and they're experiencing this hate for themselves, because ultimately it's not about not loving you, it's about not loving themselves. There's something, it's all about them in their mind, and they can't imagine how it's going to impact you, especially when they're in that crisis situation, because it's a crisis for them once they're in recovery and they relapse. And so they can't imagine it. And so what Harley did well in this book is that she detached herself, because ultimately, in order to be there for someone, you have to detach their actions when they're drunk from their sober selves. Remind yourself every day, sober so-and-so is not like this. And just know that you can't, ultimately, you can be there to talk to them, you can be there as a support, but you cannot help them if they are not able to help themselves. And it's a really difficult thing to let go. But she is able to do that. She's like, you know what? Raph is not intentionally hurting me by drinking, so I'm going to let it go. If he lies about drinking while he's been drinking, I have to let it go. Just process it and talk to a therapist or Al-Anon or somebody like that. And that's what she was doing, is reaching out to people and getting professional help to deal with that, because she wants to be there for him and she cares about him, and then they fall in love, but she needs to take care of herself. And so that's what she's doing. Self-care, she has some body positivity coming through, which is good, and ultimately, because she's emotionally resilient and she's tough and she makes sure that Raph knows that, then he would be able to go to her in the future. And even though they're young, I mean, she's only 17 and he's 18, so it's sort of a little bit of a rocky situation, but still, she did the right thing. And she also handled his relapse really well, where she had conflicting thoughts, where she's like, oh, maybe I can't do this is kind of scary, but ultimately, she took care of him, she tucked him into bed, hid the bottles from his parents, which is slightly enabling behavior, except for, ultimately, it benefited Raph in that moment, because he was already on this, like, spiral, and in having his parents involved would have made things much, much worse. And also, too, she supported him by, like, going to AA meetings and going to these sober parties. Like, she was actually there and wasn't, she wasn't getting dragged along by Raph. She actually had made the effort to be like, I'm going to come with you, which I think is really important, because he needed to see that. You need to see the action. It's not just, it's easy if you just be like, hey, just give me a call if you have a craving. It's different when you're actually, like, actively engaging and learning about it, and being there and making that effort and showing I am solid and I'm healthy enough and strong enough to be there. So that was really good. And also, too, sort of her, like, she even went, when Mike had requested her to go to rehab so he can make his big apology. She even, she was really hurt and very pissed off for just reasons, like, very much so. She was in the right there, but she, like, tried to make the effort to listen to Mike even, and talk to Mike's mom about, you can't enable him, you can't just coddle him and let him drink, you have to stop him. So I thought those things were handled very well. There's just so much more. That's the thing, is like, it kissed and just touched on things, and there were like certain moments where I'm like, yeah, this is super right, this is really good, but then there's still this missed potential where I'm like, I just wanted a little bit more. I didn't cry at this book. There were a couple of moments where I'm like, yeah, this is really good, but I didn't cry at it. I didn't get that feeling at the end where I'm like, okay, this is the book. This is when you read it, you will understand more. And that probably is just me having unreasonable expectations. Not every book you read is going to just blow you away and be the book where you're like, I feel seen, I feel understood, or be the book where it's a life changer. There definitely are books out there, and I think maybe there were some unfair expectations about this, but I mean, addiction and recovery is just, it's such a huge issue that there's not a lot of discussion about it, though. In fact, really the only people talk about it are people who are directly really impacted by it. But we have the opioid epidemic. People are dying every day. People are dying from alcoholism every single day. Not even just drunk drivers, but just cirrhosis of the liver and cancers. And that's the thing, is alcohol is cancerous. Especially for women. And also, too, I think also, I appreciated in this book that there was, both of the addicts are young, because there's this conception that it happens gradually over time. It can happen extremely quickly. And even if both of the addicts in this were men, but women, actually, it can happen much faster. And it's not unheard of to be an addict in your teens and 20s. Even with alcohol. Alcohol can, especially if you have mental health issues like PTSD or depression, anxiety, social anxiety, all of that, it can happen so fast. And especially too nowadays with binge drinking culture, where people just go crazy and just drink so much. And the thing is, when you're an addict, you're constantly riding the buzz. You drink the first shot and it feels good. You drink the second, and then all of a sudden, it's just like F. Scott Fitzgerald said, first you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes you. That's so true. And with the binge drinking, that's why we're having all these deaths. Because alcohol is a poison, and ultimately you're going to die. It's a progressive disease, and it happens fast. So they didn't really touch too much on that, but they did touch also, one thing I did also appreciate about this is the isolation of being in recovery. Raph had to give up all of his friends because they all drank heavily and used heavily, and he just had to give that up. So he had like no friends until he met Harley and they were connected, and Harley doesn't drink. So they were able to start forming a friendship, which, I felt like was a little bit rushed. I would have liked a little bit more development. I would have liked more Harley Raph scenes. But ultimately, he captured that feeling of being isolated, because, especially with drinking, like, drugs are awful, and, alcohol's a drug, but like, hard drugs and illegal drugs are very addictive and hard to wean yourself off and get off without heavy detox and treatment. But alcohol's everywhere. 87% of American adults drink. It's everywhere. It's at the grocery store. It's at drugstores. It's at like Cost Plus World Market and Costco, and then you want to go see some music, live music, and it's at a bar. And Christmas, New Year's, all these major holidays, they all involve alcohol. And that's the thing, is that when you can't be around it, it makes it really really difficult, and then all of a sudden you feel like you can't hang out with anybody except for fellow addicts, but you don't want to give up all of your friends. You still want to make connections with them, and then you're weighing the pros and cons, be like, I really want to continue a relationship with this person, but also they drink heavily and I'm getting triggered because their breath smells like whiskey or something. And so it explores that a little bit, and that also adds to why he ended up relapsing. That, and also, you know, complicated feelings. He'd also lost his sister, so he went through a trauma, because a lot of people who develop addictions went through some sort of trauma going back to childhood, or, you know, teenage years, or even in their early 20s, so there's this history of it. But ultimately, the cycle can be broken. Just because somebody comes from an addict family doesn't mean that they're doomed to be that. If you hit the certain milestones, like 6 months and a year, your brain gets rewired, and then the chances of you being successful are huge. So it's not this bleak picture that some people make out to be, where once an addict, always an addict. It's really about the mindset and your resources and the available treatments that you're able to do. I still think there's so much more that needs to be done, though. So much more research, so much more financial help. I mean, imagine all those people, all 25 million people who are suffering, and they're impacting 5 to 10 people on top of that. Imagine if they were cured. Full on, 100% cured. Think of all the intact families there would be. Think of all the relationship that would still be there. Because, let me just say, addiction kills relationships. It eats it from the inside out. It wears it down. It just dissolves it until there's no more love. It's just resentment. And it's so, so sad. And think of all the people who'd still be alive today. And think of the less crime. Because so many people commit crimes because they're desperate. They have to have it. It's ingrained in their brain, and they can no longer step outside of themselves and realize what they're doing. You can no longer get out of yourself. You're so wrapped up in everything, and everything hurts. And, you know, just imagine that. Just imagine how much more productive there would be. Imagine all the people who would be able to show up to work and they won't be hungover, or they won't call out sick. Hey guys, sorry about that. My battery died because I've been talking so much. So I will try to get this video wrapped up. I just got super passionate about talking on this subject. Anyway, so just imagine that. And I think there need to be more books out there detailing this subject. I think because a lot of people feel very uncomfortable with it and don't like to talk about it, it's, you know, again, like, there's shame, there's stigma, there's an unwillingness to come forth about things from a lot of people, because I can bet you there are way more people who are suffering from addiction than they will care to admit. Like, I know that the estimates range from 20 million to 25 million, but I would guess there are probably a lot more people who have problematic habits, maybe good, maybe not, but, you know. And again, the point of this is not to say everyone has to be a teetotaler, but the point is to just say that anyone can be an addict. It goes across race, gender, ages. It impacts everyone, and fairly, you know, yeah, again, like, anyone can develop it. Just because your parents or grandparents might not even have had it, it can skip generations. You can still have that genetic tie, and even then, genetics play like between 40 and 60% of it, but a lot of times it could also just be environmental, or it could be, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But I think there's hope. I mean, this ends on a fairly hopeful note. Harley and her sister make up, and her sister ultimately does recover. She won't always be the same. Mike is basically out of the picture, which is totally fine, because he was toxic and wasn't going to change at that point. Maybe he could someday, but he wasn't going to change at that point. And then I think there's some hope with Raph and Harley. It's going to be a little bit of a rough road, because I think ultimately, especially the first couple of years, things are going to be a little challenging, but once he hits that 1-year mark and is very solid in sobriety, then I think they stand a good chance to be together, because when you can overcome a huge challenge like that, then anything else going forward will be much, much easier once you've been able to come together with someone and be like, we've accomplished this, we've made it past, we've survived, we did it. Then any other challenge that comes up, they'll know how to do it. So I think this does end up on a hopeful level. So again, 3 out of 5 star. Not a bad book. I just probably had too many expectations. I wanted it to be the life-changing book, and it wasn't. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other books out there. I definitely am on the search for more books like this. I haven't really found too many. And this doesn't have to be young adult books. I just feel like sometimes with young adult books it presents things in such a powerful way. Like, I tend to read a lot of books on mental health that are like YA books, where I'm like, this is amazing. The way this is presented is beautiful and empowering and awesome. So that's why I was kind of hoping that this book would incorporate that. But again, worth a read. I definitely suggest, like, if you are dealing with addiction, or if you know someone who is and you kind of want to get to know some stuff a little bit better, definitely check it out. Just know this is just the tip of the iceberg, basically. There's just so much more, and I want to find a book that goes there and does so much more. But anyway, thank you so much for watching my video. Please like, rate, comment, subscribe. If you have questions, please let me know. I will answer basically anything. And if you want me to do a more in-depth discussion about anything that I brought up today, let me know. I would love to do that. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and happy reading.